She was a founding member of the Santa Barbara Women's Political Committee, and today she serves on the advisory boards of Close the Gap California and Emerge, two organizations dedicated to helping women gain appointed or elected office in the state. Susan Rose is also the co-chair of the Santa Barbara Human Rights Watch Committee, where she focuses on eliminating the national backlog of rape kits. Please join me in welcoming Susan Rose. What we decided to do this year is focus on our home. And you're going to hear in a few minutes from our three elected officials up front. I'm going to pose some questions. Kathy Morito, to my left, is currently on the Santa Barbara City Council, where she serves on the ordinance, district elections, and new zoning committees, as well as 4 of them as resident advisory councils, including the Housing Authority Commission and the Parks and Rec. Monique holds an MA in Education from Columbia University and a BA from UC Berkeley. And she currently works as the Assistant Director to the McNair Scholars Program. Next to her is County Supervisor, 2nd District Supervisor Janet Wolf. Janet is a Southern California native. She earned her BA degree from UCSB before earning a master's degree and a teaching credential from UCLA. So here's my first question. You have or are planning to run for office a second time. What made you decide to run again?
Well, you run to win, and once I won, I figured I was in it for a little while, and especially, I believe in term limits, but, of course I'm running a second time. It took a little while to get comfortable, and I'm going to say that because if any of you are thinking of running for office, it was a real nail biter for me, the first 3 or 4 months. I'm way more comfortable and confident now. And for me, it was, you work with staff, and I had to win their trust, and then you figure out how to work with them, because you don't want to boss them around, right? But sometimes you have to be demanding if you want something. So for me, it was really a matter of I figured out what kind of influence I can have at City Hall. I do a lot of work combining community work with City Hall work. I formed a group to keep kids out of gangs, and that came out of the gang injunction. You figure out how you're best effective, and that's something Salu's always telling me, learn how to be effective. So I think I've learned how to do that. And then I also think that my constituents expect me to run again. I feel a responsibility. I feel like I owe it to people to run again.
Terrific. Monique?
2 years into it, I knew I was going to run for a second term. And for me, a lot of my thought process really revolves on the level of impact that I think I can have in any capacity, in my professional capacity, in my personal capacity, my political capacity level. And so confidence in me that I was like, I'm doing it, and I'm going to win. And that was really interesting because my first race was a competitive race, very competitive, and then I had no opposition. I didn't know what to do with myself. I had a team together. I had supporters.
Oh, you know how many politicians wish they had that?
Right. But you never know the future holds, right? So, but I think that was something that I wasn't expecting. But what was important was that I was prepared. I was prepared to think about what it would be like to run a second term. And I think that is really where where I made the decision of I'm ready to do this. 2 years into it, the work is not done. When I think of our schools and how education works, I also think about the importance in investing. And sometimes investments are not short-term; they're also long-term, and they're local, and they're regional, and they're statewide. So I think that that's really where I thought, yes, I'm having an impact in the work that I'm doing. I saw that some of the issues that were complicated, that were hard, some of the many things that we are scared to ask ourselves and here were coming up. And so I understood that on the school board, there was a level of momentum to address some of our hardest challenges. And that's why I decided to run for a second term.
Thank you. The question is,
why did we decide to run again? And I would like to turn that around, and because I always ask myself, when is it time, when do I stop? When is it time to hang it all up? And when I was on the school board, I didn't think that time would ever come because I loved every meeting, I loved every issue, I loved getting my board packet. But then there was a time, at the end of my 12 years, when I started, that enthusiasm started to wane a little bit. And I realized that it was time for me to move on. Let someone else run for office. There's this feeling where you become a little, I probably know other elected official feels this way, but I did. I felt very egocentric that I had to be on the Goleta School Board for things to happen. But look at the people who are on the Goleta School Board now. You know, Susan Epstein is a terrific example. So we have to know when it's time to move on and when it's time to find something else or hang it all up. Well, I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to run for the Board of Supervisors. And as I was finished my first term, finished my second term, I had to make that decision. Do I want to run again for a third term? And the answer was absolutely yes. There was no question in my mind that I needed to run for the second term. Mainly because we had a lot of unfinished business, not just in the second district. As Susan mentioned, Goleta Beach, we had the Eastern Goleta Valley Community Plan, we had the Climate Action Plan, we had many changes going on in our mental health department. I really felt that I was hitting my stride, and I really wanted to, was passionate about running for a second term and being a supervisor for a third term. I love my job, and I think that's what you have to ask yourself. Do you love your job? Are you passionate? And I was. Now, the flip side of that, or the other part of that thought process was knowing that it was very likely that I was going to have a very difficult campaign, because unlike the people who were lucky enough not to have campaigns, I am the lucky person who always has someone run against me and vigorously run against me. And as many of you know, this last campaign was no different. But I will say that as the campaign was rolling along and I was seeing the folks that were influencing and donating to my opponent, I was even more excited to run because I realized that I did not want him to represent me. And so I worked harder, and all of you worked harder. And I'm so glad that I was reelected. I'm so glad I made that decision. I'm so honored and proud to have staff like Mary Warman and Hillary Campbell who maintain the office, because that's my job. I also want to run a campaign, and so if I didn't have that support, that would have also made my decision very difficult. So everything came together, and I'm very honored. Thank you.
All right, here's question 2, okay? Because I think we were kind of getting in there. I've asked each of them to think about one issue unique to their district, community, or constituency. Something rather special that they were challenged by. What challenge did you face, and how did you resolve that issue if you did? But just as some background, I was on the Juvenile Justice Coordinating Committee, and I learned so much, and yet Kathy shaking her head because she comes with me to some of those meetings, which I'm so grateful for. So as I'm on this committee and learning about what programs our mental health department provides to our probation department, I was so impressed. I was so proud. We had a partnership with UCSB, and our UCSB partners are here. I mean, it's just kind of great to see everyone here. So the programs that were being provided by mental health to our probation kids was evidence-based, and it was working. We had developed a great partnership, not just with UCSB, but all of our departments. And as we were approaching our budget for the county, I noticed it was a very small little line in one of our budget reports that there was a recommendation that we were going to privatize mental health services in the probation department. And having known and understood what we were doing and how it was working, I was appalled by that potential move in that direction. And so I
started by meeting with department heads, and I wasn't really making any progress. Our CEO at the time, we were in the midst of the recession. It was a money-saving, that's what they were saying. It was a money-saving exercise, and they were going to privatize with the same group that was providing mental health services in our jail. And by the way, they had never provided mental health services to juveniles ever. So we were going to be the test case. So it took many months, and during one of our budget hearings, I brought it up, and it didn't really get any traction. It came up during our budget hearings, and I asked a specific question to be answered during our budget hearings about the impact to our kids, how this would impact our kids. After that, and I thank Salute, I thank the other supervisors, because once we were able to have a discussion and we were able to see the documentation of how it was going to impact our program, the other supervisors came on board, and we stopped this from happening. And if you live in this world where governments are always looking for efficiencies, and privatization is one of those things that you always can look at, and sometimes it works, but oftentimes it doesn't. And it was one of those issues that was so important to me that I thought we really needed to address it, and we successfully, with I think it was that perseverance, because I just knew it was so important. And having our Board of Supervisors be responsive and responsible helped us to make the decision that I was hoping for.
Thank you, Janet. A lesson learned, watch the small print in the budgets. Monique, how about you?
Well, one of the issues that comes to mind was in 2013 when I was serving as school board president. And in education, we have ideas of what schools look like, and we have charter schools. And charter school renewals are exciting moments for school boards. And we had a charter school renewal that was a very difficult conversation. And it's hard to have conversations that are meant to be community conversations in a boardroom. And so for me, the difficult part of this particular moment was that we were guiding the conversation. We were thinking about what's in the best interest of the students, while also ensuring that we were compliant and understood what the state wanted. And there were 6 things that came up, but the one that caught the attention of the public was one of the requirements that the state wants to ensure that charter schools are reflective of the school community. And this produced some really intense, but I think important dialogue that needed to happen in the community. And it was very difficult because as a school board president, you are leading that conversation, both for the public and for board members. And the other thing that I think is really unique, and I think Janet would understand, and my fellow school board sisters out there, that 90% of your constituents are parents. And these are the children of parents who care a lot. So we're not always talking about issues that are removed. There are issues that parents go home to and see their child, and sometimes emotion really comes out. So in this particular moment, it was a really hard conversation to have, and we had to recognize some challenging comments that had been made about whether or not we should think about the school and the school being reflective of the community at large. And so one of the things that I learned was that, again, the boardroom is really good for structured conversations, but not always the best for really difficult conversations. And while we did make a decision to renew that particular charter school charter, my work wasn't done. My work really involved going out of this boardroom and having conversations with community members, with school members of this particular school, because I wasn't clear that we were on the same page after that particular meeting. And that has turned out to be so important because now we're all on the same page. We're all working towards the same goals, and we have this common understanding of why it's important to think about our schools and how to ensure that students have access to both traditional schools, charter schools, and schools of choice. And so I think for me, it was hard. There was a lot of name calling. I'm the only Latina on the school board, and you see me and you see that, right? You can't ignore who I am and what I bring to the table. And so I think that was difficult, but it was, again, just really important that I understood that my work didn't finish after a decision night was made, that my work continued. And not just because you want to get along with people, because it's really about what's in the best interest for the students.
Inside and outside.
Absolutely, inside and outside.
Kathy, your turn.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to pull back a little bit and talk about empowering the Latino electorate. And I do a daily affirmation every morning and every night, and that's one of my goals. And in the context of district elections, that's really important right now because we will be electing someone from the East Side District, Latino community, not totally homogeneous, but and then within the Latino community, it's not homogeneous either. But why are my people so sleepy when it comes to voting and being engaged in politics? And, you know, there's a lot of theories about that people come from Mexico where government was corrupt and they just don't trust it, or people are working and they're focused on day-to-day, you know, say for instance, your kid is having a hard time in school, you're not going to pay attention to the decel plan, maybe. But if you're engaged in politics like you should be, you would know if you want your kid to stay in Santa Barbara, maybe you can pay attention to affordable housing policies. Without affordable housing, those kids are going to have to go somewhere else. With the decel plan, we will raise the water rates, and that does affect people's pocketbooks. So, you know, there's a way to get to people and let them know that it really makes a difference, you know, who their representatives are. And then especially for me, Santa Barbara, there's a huge class difference. And people talk about racism and sexism. Yeah, we got plenty of that. But we have an incredible rich and poor have and have not going on in Santa Barbara. And if somebody on the city council is not paying attention to funding the parks and the libraries, looking out for the homeless, looking out for the immigrants, even though they can't vote for me, I care a lot about them. They are part of our community. And I stood up to the news press when they called them illegals. And now the news press is so again, I'm bleeding over into the next question about when newspapers attack you and you just live with it and you live through it. Janet gets
Kathy, I know about that.
You gotta get Monique up there where the news press is throwing some stuff at you. No. But my point is that it's really important to have everyone represented on a governing body. People look and see someone in political office, they recognize themselves, and they think that that person is responding to them and their experience, and then maybe we can get people. What if we had 20 Latino candidates right now dying to run for everything? Right on! You know, but that's not the case. And so it's a longer goal. Right. Then we're going to end again. Okay.
Hang on. Next question. By the way, for those of you who are not familiar with our theme, our statement on our materials, it's voice, access, power. So that's exactly what Kathy's talking about. Kathy, the last question, which you know, the panel knows, how would you suggest, if it leads into what you were saying, how would you suggest we get involved in politics here in Santa Barbara? Very specifically, how would you be willing to assist or support or mentor?
Oh, well, I already do. And I'm always talking to women about, I think it's like a courage thing maybe, like you're afraid. And, well, yeah, but you just, bravery is like doing it even though you are afraid, right? And so then you have the Women's Political Committee, you have the Latino Leaders Network, you might have higher education, other people, other groups that are going to help you, because being a candidate is really scary. And I tell people that I felt like vomiting the first 2 months that I was a candidate. It was awful. I had the nerves. I'm a nervous person, you can see that. And, but you just pull it together and you go to the candidates forums and you speak your piece and you're confident and then it's the voter at the door who likes you and trusts you and votes for you.
And those are the moments that are really incredible.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. But don't be afraid to run for office. I guess that's what I want to say. And then even with the news press ragging on me all the time, you just develop like a Teflon. It's just maybe like any other job. If you're in law or banking, nobody's totally happy. You go home and you have your spiritual center. So there's a way to do it, and it's a tough job, but totally worthwhile. I go home and I'm really happy with the victories that I have.
I can tell you I spent 8 years doing yoga and I still do.
See?
Do we have, Monique, how about you? What would you suggest one of the ways to get involved? We never have enough women in public office, and we already heard from Kathy, she's there to support, help. What about you?
Well, I am absolutely there to support, to mentor, to encourage, and to ask you to please run for office. But I also think there's a lot of opportunities. I hear a lot of women who say, I just don't like politics. And then I think of, how I grew up. I grew up in a big family. I'm like, but we have politics in every space of our lives, right? And I think it's just important to recognize that it's about, navigating difficult conversations, having difficult challenges, having to make tough decisions. Negotiation is part of what we do. We just choose how to use it in different spaces. And I think in public office in our community, it's very much needed. I get excited when someone says, well, I kind of want to be on the school board. And they look, oh, well, what kind of commitment do you have? Do you want to do 1 meeting a year, 2 meetings a year? Because I have committees for you. And I think that that's a really big deal. People hear of commissions, they hear of nonprofit boards, and they don't know how to get on. They don't know people there. There's a fear of like, well, does that mean I make a financial commitment as well? So I think it's important to find ways for women to get involved at all levels. And that's something that I try really actively to do. As a scholar at UCSB, I am constantly using research to influence my decision making. And I find that for a lot of students, if you talk to them about how their research is applicable to change policy, there's an excitement there where they link all the information they've been learning with real possibilities of how to do better for our community.
Now, before Jenna gets on, I know there's several members of the Santa Barbara Commission on the Status of Women. Where's Laura? Laura's our chair, and they're coming. Have you given the reporters of this Tuesday?
Yeah, Tuesday, yes.
All right, so you heard earlier there are 50 openings on boards and commissions. It's just a county, right? So there's so many opportunities to get involved, and I know that the WPC is out there and ready to help you get along and find that path and guide you. So Janet, last comment for the 3 questions. Thank you.
And I also want to commend our women's commissioners. Laura's here. 2 of my commissioners, Gail Teton-Landis and Suzanne Peck, are here. Who else is? Why don't all the women commissioners stand up?
Yeah, let's see you.
And I just also want to let you know that aside from what we just heard about this report that's coming out, the Women's Commission has put together a South County and a North County Women's Resource Guide. And these very handy, incredibly important little forms are out on the table if anyone wants to take them with you. So, we talk a lot about being involved in commissions and boards, and my path to elected office was a little bit different. So 20 years ago, when I was 40 years old, so I'm 16 now, 20 years ago, seems like yesterday, but I have my own business. My husband and I had 3 kids. I was always reading the newspaper. I was very interested in what was going on in public education. You heard about my educational background. My dad was a teacher. He was he was president of the teachers union for about 20 years. So we had a lot of meetings at our house. So I was always interested in politics and what was going on. But it wasn't until my older daughter was in junior high school, and some of you may remember the school board at that time was, it was the start of stealth candidates. And we had one school board member who was from the Eagle Forum, very, very conservative. And there was a few things that had happened in the school district at that time that was very concerning to me as someone who so believes in public education. And myself and Nancy Carter, who was also a school board member, marched down to the school board. I don't think either of us had really even been to PTA meetings, but there we were. We marched down to the school board and complained during public comment, which we didn't know anything about, but we knew we had to speak, and we complained about the school board member and what she had done in basically promoting her religious beliefs in the school district. And so it got some press. And then a couple months later, there was an opening on the Goleta School Board. And a few friends got together and mentioned, oh, Janet, you should run for school board. I had no idea what I was getting into. My husband and I, it was the day that we were getting ready I had to sign my name. It was Fiesta. And we sat on State Street and I went down and signed up. But I have to say it wasn't without some contemplation and some support. So even though I didn't reach out at that time, I think it was maybe around the time Sbwpc was forming, the people who supported me at that time was Harriet Miller, met with me. For those of you who know Harriet or knew Harriet, she was very involved in public education. So she talked to me, and I don't know, she gave me a sense of confidence in moving forward. So, that was how it all started, kind of crazy. And I just fell into this amazing profession that I loved. It's one of the three things that access, voice, and what's the third? Power. So there is nothing better than having a voice and being able to vote. Being one of 5 people who votes on such important issues in our county. I mean, it's an awesome responsibility. So I'm really, whatever the path is, it gets you involved, because we're not all the same and we're all going to have something different. But I think the one driving force and common force is our passion. And I think you see it up here. We have passion. And so if you have that passion and the drive, I would say, go for it.
And I want to reinforce, there's nothing like being at the table to make that decision to cast that vote. And in the county, so often it's a 3-2, and the future of the county, or at least the issues we care about, depends on who's sitting and casting that third vote. So